So I've been browsing this subreddit for a bit and just remembered an old story that my mom told me from when I, a 17-year-old male, was very young, around 3 years old. My mom is a therapist. She has plenty of clients with mental disorders, PTSD, suicidal thoughts, etc. She had one client who was a female police officer. She had started going to therapy because her daughter had recently passed away and was completely devastated. They had a few sessions together until the female police officer ended up taking her own life. I'm not quite sure how much time had passed after her passing when my paranormal experience happened. Maybe a couple days, possibly a week, but one day, shortly after, I was in my parents' bedroom next to my crib when I looked in their closet and saw a dark figure standing there. I couldn't make out any facial details, but I could see that it was wearing a police uniform. It wasn't frightening or threatening to me in any way. I walked out of the bedroom and up to my mom and said, "Mommy, there's a police officer in your closet." When recollecting on the story, my mom told me that she instantly gotten chills and was taken aback by what I had just said. So yeah, that's it. I personally don't remember much of it besides the vague memory of seeing the shadowy figure in my parents' closet. I've heard that young children are more prone to seeing supernatural entities, so it makes sense that it happened to me at such a young age. So around 6 years ago, I lived near Old Town Jerusalem. Most parts of it that are built right now are a few hundred years old at most, but the foundations date back thousands of years. I used to hang around there quite a bit during the evening and night, as it is very beautiful and quiet when all the tourists leave. Plus, a good friend of mine lived there with her family. Most of the time, there was nothing out of the ordinary, just tiny old alleys and streets. But I did experience some things that made me doubt my skepticism of the supernatural over that year living there. First, one evening as I was going to visit my friend, I suddenly felt very cold. This was around mid-August, which in Israel means over 30 degrees Celsius. It was a pretty sudden shift. I had this strong feeling of being watched, and the streetlight near me was flickering. I kept walking towards her house, and a minute or so later, I heard footsteps behind me. This freaked me out, as the street seemed pretty empty, and the footsteps sounded close, and came out of nowhere. I had to turn right a few steps later, and as I turned, I looked around and saw no one there. That creepy being watched feeling kept on until I got to my friend's house. I did tell her what happened, and she said that I'm not the first to experience such things on that street. The second thing that comes to mind is that I was walking around the Russian area when I heard a strong bang come from what looked like some public building. When I looked towards it, I saw the front door wide open, which was odd, as no one was around. I looked for a little longer and saw what seemed to be a figure of a man looking at me from the front window. It was dark, and I couldn't make out much more of it. A second later, it seemed to disappear, and the front door slammed shut in front of my face. I noped the fuck out of there. I later found out that it was a Russian hospital. You all can look that one up. Apparently, it's counted as one of the most haunted buildings in Jerusalem. So much so, some guards refused to patrol that area in previous decades. The last one happened when my friend was with me. I joined her for an evening prayer at the synagogue. Not religious or Jewish for that matter, but I do enjoy the tradition occasionally, and we left early since she was feeling bad. We were both heading to the backyard when we heard the gate open and close. We weren't in line of sight to it yet, but if someone would go out, we would have likely seen them, as there was only one path back. However, as we approached it, We didn't see anyone going in either. That, for itself, was odd. But as we walked towards it, it started slowly opening by what seemed to be itself. We both looked at each other, turned around, and walked towards the front gate, deciding silently that a freaky moving by itself gate isn't something that we felt like dealing with. After a few steps, we started hearing footsteps following us. We sped out of there, practically running, though my friend claims that at some point she felt something grab her arm. Personally, I didn't experience that, but when we got to the front of the synagogue, one of the other ladies was also outside and leaving towards her home. She saw how frightened we were and asked what happened. We told her we heard something chase us, and she claimed that she saw no one behind us. Stayed away from that synagogue ever since, even though it's counterintuitive as places of prayer usually don't have this kind of experience. I had a few other weird vibes and feelings of being watched, etc. when I was living around there, but nothing visual or auditory except these. Still sometimes doubt it, thinking it's just me being a little edgy since it's a really old, kind of quiet place, especially after dark. This story is from a while back, and I got reminded of it today. This happened when I was in the 5th grade. We moved to a new house where the landlords lived downstairs and we lived upstairs. Even before we moved in, this house gave me the chills. I begged my dad not to move here. Obviously, I was ignored. It was my parents, sister, and grandparents living in the house. After we moved in, I would get a reoccurring nightmare where I was being chased by something in the veranda downstairs. I fall and get dragged by someone while screaming for help. I would always wake up terrified. I shared a room with my grandma, and my parents and sister shared another. My grandpa slept in the living room. I had pictures of several deities stuck on the walls of my room because of how terrified I was in the house. That is the only place I felt like someone was not stalking or staring at me. The kitchen plus storage room especially creeped me out because every time I was in there, I felt like I was being watched constantly. I would leave as soon as I can. My grandma used to feel really scared as well. She would always wake me up to use the restroom outside our room. One night, as I stood outside the restroom, I turned around, and at the entryway to the kitchen, I saw a misty figure standing there, watching me. I almost shit my pants, but I didn't scream. I grabbed my grandma as soon as she came out and ran to our room. This kept happening until we moved out. I never told anybody. 2 years after we moved into another house, my grandparents and I were talking. This house came up and they told me that it was haunted. I was surprised because I thought I had made it up in my head and was probably overthinking. Then my grandparents told me several stories of their experiences in the house. One of the things the entity used to do was go outside to the veranda outside the house and scream for help to my grandma in my voice in the middle of the night. My grandpa would look outside the window, see me, think it was me, and run to help outside, only to find no one there. He would run to my room and see me sleeping fine. Sometimes he felt like it was sitting on his neck and choking him. One day, his friend, who is very spiritual, came home to visit him randomly. A few minutes after he came, he suddenly ran towards the kitchen, looking at the entryway and the storage room area, and screamed,
"Who are you? Why are you torturing this family? Leave, leave, leave."
My grandparents were so confused since they never told him about anything. A few minutes later, he drank 2 gallons of water and then said,
"You really should leave this house. There is a very evil entity following you guys, and it's the reason for all your misfortunes in this house.
Turns out the landlord's father unalived himself in that house a year before we moved in. We found this after we moved out. It turns out when I felt like I was being followed or watched all the time in the house, it was true. It genuinely scared the crap out of me after I listened to my grandparents.